Welcome, everyone. We're going to give everyone a few minutes to sign in. We're still a little bit before 6. So we will try to get started promptly at 6. If you have ability to access the chat while we're waiting, go ahead and type what county or counties you're with in the chat for me, please. Thanks. Okay. We're just a little after 6. I think we'll have some folks trickling in. But I did want to, since we've already started it in the chat discussing the education series, I was really glad to see that we just had so much interest in that and that so many of our state agencies who provided the training before were willing to kind of step in and give that training again. So at this point, it just has been me kind of putting things together. I welcome anybody else to participate, or like I said in the chat, if there's just something you're interested in learning about, let's see if we can get some speakers arranged for that as well. Um, and I will put you to work, but all kidding aside, I think it's, just important for us to kind of share what we're doing and how we can help each other. And this just happened to be a topic I had some background in. So there was a link there. You can get to the other trainings that are planned for this year. And we do have a gap in September. If there's enough demand, we may bring this one back or do a refresher on that if we don't have anything else come up. And going to the presentation here. So we're going to be looking tonight at um, developing clear goals, objectives, and performance measures. My name's Amy Morie. I'm a registered landscape architect. I'm with Bradford Soil and Water Conservation District. And we've just started working on a Florida Federated Conservation Districts, kind of something, a group that would encompass these actions and anything else we're able to do for the district statewide. Oops, I think I just knocked my presentation out. Bear with me just 1 second, folks. There we go. Okay. Um, if you have any questions as we go through tonight's presentation, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask those as we go along. Unfortunately, with the computer setup I have, I'm going to go ahead and turn off video just in the interest of resources here, and I may not be able to see the chat while we're presenting. So just verbally chime in and we'll get questions answered as we go. Turn the video on. Okay. All right, so back to our clear goals, objectives, and performance measures. So this is something that I learned when I was working for UF IFAS Extension in Clay County. It's how annual reporting is done within that system. And it's also how you kind of evaluate what your program needs are and develop everything so that you're easily able to report on it, see results, and know where you need to change course. So the outline we'll go over tonight is the goals themselves. What are they? How do we use situation statements, which is a way to set up what those goals are? And what is the big picture that we're looking at with those goals? So this will help to differentiate them from objectives, which will be our second topic of discussion. We'll go into quite a bit of detail about kind of the levels of objectives and what you're going for there. And then we're going to look at, I'd say, Keep It Smart. This is an acronym for a system that just makes it easy to have all the elements of success in one of your objectives. I find it's pretty easy to follow, and it just kind of helps keep me on track with what I'm putting into those goals and objectives. It's good to keep these in reporting your end goal in mind. So when you're developing your goals and objectives, or if you're re-looking at them, if you already have them in your organization, look at that reporting, have an outline for where you're going, and we'll look at some other ways that you can really convey the success of your stories, building on the outcomes that came from your objectives. So it's a good idea, like I said, to do this with the reporting in mind. But that said, our board is new to this process. I did have the work experience with this, but We haven't had to do it as a board until the legislation changed. For this first round, we actually have our goals and objectives are to evaluate all of our existing programs and revamp them with whatever our um, community picture paints as the best way for us to employ the resources that we have. Okay, and so next slide, we're going to look at those situation statements. So this is what's going to demonstrate the need for your program. It establishes the background. It's answering kind of all the questions of what's the problem? Why is it a problem? Who or what does it affect? How are the needs that you're going to address later in this process identified? And who are you working with or for on the problem? So these are statements that confirm why you're doing the project, why there's a need for this, and you want to remember to have that tie back to your district's mission and vision. Keep everything detailed, but eventually you're going to want to have some brevity just for clarity in there. So I kind of recommend as you're thinking about the situation statement, especially if you're new to the process of goals and objectives or you're doing them for a new program, kind of put everything in there you think may be relevant, and then you can whittle it down once you've created those goals and objectives. Go back, see if you can cut out any fluff that's less relevant to what you want to accomplish, or see if there's any of those points in the situation that you may want to expand on to better support your goals and objectives. Um, and next slide, we will look at an actual example of a situation statement. So this is, in this case, just setting up the problem. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I skipped one. Sorry. There we go. So Bradford County, Florida, this is something describing our flood risk. It goes into a brief bit of information about why that's important to human and natural systems, goes through some of the topography, what we're facing as challenges. So if you are working, say, with water quality, this might be nutrient level data. If you're working with a urban garden, this might be lack of food in urban areas, lack of fresh produce and things like that. So this is kind of setting up why this program is going to be important, and how our goals are going to be able to point back to this situation, provide a solution to it, start to hone in on it. So this is a very short example. The goals are not included in this situation statement. I have seen formats where, they spell it out, situation, give the situation, then goals, give the goal for that project, reiterate a little bit about the project. I've also seen them where they just tack on a sentence to the end of the situation stating what that goal is. Depends on, who you're giving this report to, how clear you think that needs to be. I kind of prefer to spell it out and have it separate so those little headings are there so that people can kind of point and go, oh, that's where the goal is. I can find it very easy. And in the example that I'll give out in the hand, I'll have a copy of this posted. There'll be a much longer example of a situation statement. Okay, so next, little look at the big picture. Just kind of, what are you going for with these goals? Situation statement is setting that tone, given the facts, kind of implying what needs to be done. The goals are going to start to paint the picture of where you're going. But they should be rather broad, should be looking long-term as the problem may need, and be sure to, again, support the district mission and vision. You'll notice we repeat a lot in this presentation, everything kind of pointing back and flowing out of the mission and vision, and really creating a strong picture of a coherent district. And your big picture really should derive from a needs assessment. It's going to be addressing a problem. So how did you reach the conclusions on that problem? What data did you look at? What community members or members of that particular community you're going to be helping did you talk to? How did you collect that data? It's something you should be doing periodically anyway, because relevancy can change. Your objectives and performance measures can be hard to achieve if the situations, say, that surround the problem or other conditions that change that relevancy. You may be in the lucky position of achieving a goal, and then what next? You gotta come up with another goal and another thing to do. Or you may wind up with goals that are unachievable, and you wind up, after having evaluated the performance measures you set up, having to backtrack and rewrite that goal into something that is achievable. And we'll get into that a little bit more further down the line. So let's look at an example of just one goal. And I should put a disclaimer. All of these I put for Bradford Soil and Water. They're all kind of just little drafts I put together. So these aren't examples from our actual reporting, which we are still working on. But these are good enough to just kind of show you the elements that should be here. So here, the goal of the water levels program is to inform and improve flood control in the county through better data on surface water movement. It goes back to that situation statement we set up. It implies kind of what we're going to be doing to solve this problem, but we're not getting into the details yet. It's broad enough for us to develop those details in the objectives. Okay, so if we look at that paired with the situation statement, as I mentioned, one way that you could format that, just have that heading and have the two flow right together. The goal being that kind of end sentence there. It's a good idea when you're drafting these two, if you're new to the reporting process, to have clarity and consistency. So kind of develop this as an outline, and as you go through each project and its goal, make sure those are in a consistent format throughout your report. It's just going to help people to understand things better. All right, next slide. We have um, back to that big picture, because it's easy to get ahead of yourself here. I know, I start writing goals and I am immediately thinking about the details that I want to accomplish and how I would do that. And so I can wind up putting too much information here. So again, that's a great place to use that outline. If I start getting into the weeds of details, I can cut that out and paste it into the right section of my outline as I go. But you really want to keep it focused on that focus and vision, why you're doing the program, and something that's going to guide your objectives and your planning. And then just remember, they don't have to be measurable. If you're starting to put numbers into them, you're probably getting more into the realm of objectives. So let's look at a couple examples. All right, so we have the Invader Watch Warriors program, increasing public awareness. That can be a great goal, and you can develop several objectives on how to get that. District will increase county landowner interest in EQIP. Um, doesn't say exactly how you're going to increase that interest or measure that increase in interest. But it just states that, goal of what you're going to do in broad senses that you can delve down into. Same with this last one. It's a little bit more prescriptive, but it's still not giving you a specific measurable statement, keeping it broad. All right, and I'm gonna minimize the presentation just for a second to check in with Zoom and look at the chat. We are recording tonight's presentation, so hopefully everyone who missed out on tonight's presentation, we will be able to post it later. I'm a little new to the Zoom process, so if that does not manage to record and be postable successfully, we probably will do this one again because we have had a lot of interest in it. Okay, and any questions so far on the goals portion? All right, hearing none, we will move on to objectives. So goals and objectives, keep the ideas separate as you go. These are going to be statements that for each of your programs specifies what changes you're expecting of that audience that you're going for. And you're going to put it in terms that you can measure. So use strong verbs. We'll look a little bit more at the strong verbs a little later in the presentation. You want to keep it to one purpose or aim per objective. Um, that's why you'll have probably multiple objectives per goal. And I prefer each program to have 2 to 3 objectives for the goals for that program. If you have a program that has more than 4, you might want to consider, well, first, is that within your capacity? You have to be able to achieve these goals, hopefully. So, do you have the time, the talent, the tracking, and the funds that's going to allow that objective to be met? Or all of those objectives for a goal to be met? And if you also have more than 4, you might want to consider it. Maybe you really have 2 programs. It might be a little bit unwieldy unless you split it into a couple of compartments and have 2 projects to address everything that you're trying to do. Okay, so a little bit more on objectives. They should be written so that anyone could kind of pick up this role and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. That is a really well-written objective when it just doesn't rely on me and my interpretation to get it done. Okay, and they're also going to include that performance measure. So, you're going to have to gauge your audience and what they're capable of. And when we get into levels of objectives next, we'll see how that really comes into play. But you have to consider, so how are you going to get the data that you're going to report on? That's going to be part of your performance measure. And are you meeting the audience where they are? Or is what you're going to be asking of them to get that data something that they are comfortable and capable with giving? So you have to set that up so that it aligns with your target audience and outcomes here, basically. So, for example, we know we're probably never going to get 100% survey response, even if we sit them down with that survey in the classroom before they leave. So instead of writing 100% of participants will do something, it's better to kind of estimate and clarify that a little further. Maybe it's 75% of participants responding to a 6-month post-event survey will report having done. And notice here, I'm not saying all of the people who showed up. I'm saying all of the people who responded to the survey we sent out after we showed up, because we're not going to get that 100% participation. Um, in all those cases, have to meet the audience where they are. So let's take a look at kind of the levels of objectives that we should be looking at. And these have a lot to do with what kind of state the audience is in. If your audience is someone who is homeless or hungry, they are not thinking much above the level of housing and food, not going to focus on big environmental problems. If your person is comfortable, they might be in a spot to educate themselves. You'll kind of know within your district, I think a lot of the times, the willingness to accept information, as well as to go beyond that. So educating people is kind of the first level that we can approach them on. It's the easiest to write and report on, because it's kind of like the least impactful, to say it politely. So you may be just getting qualitative responses here. Things like, I enjoyed the program. I liked what we learned. I appreciate the problem more. These can be the kind of responses that you get. 100% of the kids raised their hand when asked if they had fun learning today. So, these are responses it's easy to gauge. I can just kind of ask that question in the end, see how many hands go up. But it's also the least meaningful because it's like I told them, but there's no guarantee of what they're going to do with it. It's a little bit above, handing out flyers at the entrance to the fair. You have no idea if that information's even looked at. In this case, it was looked at, but you don't really have much more sense of what might be done with it. So it's not a barrier to having that as an objective. You're still getting attention, thinking on the problem. But just be realistic when you're writing those objectives and consider using that kind of objective along with another objective that would further the ends of that goal that you started with there. So next level up is knowledge gain. And this can be measured in programs pretty easily with, simple pre or post test. Have 3 to 5 questions on the material you're going to cover. Give it to them when they first sit down and give it to them again before they leave. And if they have answered more right at the end, you can demonstrate that they have learned something. It's the actual numbers that you can put in when you go to report for your outcomes there. Um, Surveys can be another way to do this, if you have ways to reach them after the program. And this can be more valuable in terms of not just did they learn something, but did they start to put it into practice? Um, we also I like to ask questions about whether or not they plan to share the information. So, 100% of participants may have learned something as evidenced on that pre and post test, and 70% indicated on an exit survey that they plan to share that information with others. Uh, so this is, just kind of a great way to really hone down on the fact that your programs are creating some impact. All right. Next level of objectives we'll look at is behavioral change. So this is kind of the gold standard. What we really want people to do is do something different. Conserve water, improve their crop rotation, restore critical habitat, use that learning in practice. So, they learned about low volume irrigation, but they actually went and installed it and are using it, or they're reducing their fertilizer use per acre to follow BMPs. Um, it is easily measured. We can follow up with, a site visit, a questionnaire, a phone call, checking in with people to describe how they're going to do that. But we want to make sure that's written into the objective, how we're going to measure those results. Um, I like to use the example of brushing your teeth. That's a common one from when I was a kid. I may date myself, but turning off that tap when you brush your teeth. I could ask people when they come in, for the last level of objectives, the last slide, as far as, do you know how many gallons of water are wasted when you do that? Have a few numbers you throw at them, see if they get that right. Tell them during the presentation it's 4 gallons typically when an adult brushes their teeth. So, save stopping running the tap once you get to that practice change level and they have said, yes, I have stopped running that tap. Well, then I can point and say, okay, someone brushing their teeth 2 times a day, that's 4 gallons of water each time, 8 gallons a day times 352 gallons a year times the number of individuals. I can put a number on how many gallons of water we've saved by putting that message out and following up to see if people change what they were doing. Um, so these are just things to think about when you're writing those objectives is how are you going to get that information back? And how is it going to be a strong indicator of the success of your programs? The further we move up these levels, the more successful typically these programs are perceived to be. Okay, if we look at the last level of objective, Social, economic, and environmental conditions. This is very high level. It's nice. I wouldn't think of it as the standard for what most districts are trying to do. You can look for opportunities here, but we're typically not going to, instigate new laws. We may have opportunities to show how we saved our county or local regulator some time, money, resources, our citizens, things like that. But just try not to get too lofty into this level of objectives. Um, it's very high. It may not be appropriate for the district's mission and vision, especially with some of the legal responsibilities that we have. Um, but it is something to keep in mind that it's kind of that end goal of, we looked at telling people, making sure people understood what we told them, having people that will show others what we're tell them, train the trainer kind of conditions, and then moving into the behavior change, practice change, and then finally changing the conditions that lead to more of society basically changing their practices is what this last level is getting at, if that makes sense. Okay, so questions that you want to ask yourself about your objectives um, really include, is the audience there? Is it ready to hear the message? And we're going to recap some of the things we've talked about with these objectives yet so far. Um, do we have the right people, the equipment, time, budget, whatever it's going to take to make this objective happen? Um, if I say I'm going to keep a 700-acre site clear of invasives, I darn sure better make sure I've got all of these elements that are going to line up to make that happen. And then finally, are they consistent with the values of the Florida Soil and Water Conservation Districts in the community and with the legal responsibilities of the districts? Okay. So that is a whole lot about objectives with a couple of examples. We'll look at more examples as we get into the SMART objectives here next. Uh, Okay, so SMART is, like I said, an acronym. Um, and basically, it's a formula approach to making objectives. It's been around in various forms since the early 80s. So, like I said, I was introduced to it working for UF IFAS. It's used very commonly in their reporting and their program development. And I've looked at their, say, I have a few versions out that you can find just by doing some internet research. Um, and you can find some of these others. It's helpful to kind of look at the different models. You just get different ideas that you can apply to your own programs. You get, maybe a different structure is more appropriate for what you're doing. But it will just kind of help to know all of the ways that can be done. And they're all going to lead to improved goal and objective writings. So in this case, we're using all of these elements of SMART being specific, measurable, assigned, realistic, and timed to create a strong objectives. We're going to plug each of these elements into a sentence or maybe two sentences at the most. And that's what's going to make our objective. Um, and we want to have, like we said earlier, it's good to have that overall format of how things are outlined. But when you get into this, you have a little bit more leeway to mix it up. You don't want to do it in the SMART order every time. That's just an easy way to remember the elements. Um, so putting them in different orders actually will start, your objectives won't kind of sound wooden and repetitive. This is where you can mix it up a little bit. And then the measurable part of this is your performance measures. This is how you're going to demonstrate your success with the program. So it's writing it right into that objective and making it easier to connect the objective to an outcome that you'll report on at the end of the year, end of the program period, whenever that reporting period is for that. Um, Not reaching those performance measures, when you go to report, it can be a check to go back and check these things, check the program overall, and make sure what you're doing is still relevant and reaching the audience well. Okay, so if we take another look at SMART objectives in out of the SMART order here, uh, questions to ask and how the SMART is involved. Can you actually do this? That's the realistic part. Do you have the capacity? Do you have the resources, the volunteer management set up, whatever's needed to make that happen, that objective? Um, who will change? So that's the assigned part. Who is your target audience? And it's better to not have that be vague. You're not addressing all the residents of Florida or the world. You're addressing uh, timber producers within your county. You're addressing youth with an interest in conservation. The more specific you can be, the better. Because that shows that you know that target audience. You can hone that message in. It's very hard to have a message that's going to reach all of the people. So it's just going to help clarify things. Okay, next, when will the change take place? This is your timed. Is it going to be a year? Is it going to be over the course of 5 years? Is it going to be 2 months? That's where you're going to define that time period. How will you know the change has taken place? So this is what you're measuring, your performance measures. And the standard or method that you use will trigger, yes, I know I achieved my objective. I have changed the condition I set out to change. Um, you will sometimes see instead of measurable, meaningful used in this acronym. And this is because when we looked at those levels of objectives, so meaningful would apply to those lower level objectives, measurable would apply to those higher level objectives where you're actually got some quantifiable information coming back out of that. And then meaningful, realistic, take those into account every step of the way when you're developing these objectives. Okay, so let's look at an example. And here we have it in a formula form. And I think this is what really makes it easy to kind of, okay, here's my program, here's my goal. And here's what I've written up as a brief on my objectives. Now here's a sentence to plug it into to help me express that easily. So it could be typically you want to increase or decrease something. You may want to maintain it if you have a problem you know you're not going to make better, but you don't want it to get worse. But typically it's an increase or decrease of something. What that something is, what percent or number that you're going to change it by, among what audience, by when, that's your time constraint, and then as measured by, and that is the performance measures that you're putting in place to know that you did what you set out to do. So as an example, using that exact formula, the Irrigation Saver program will increase knowledge of water-saving irrigation practices 50% among X number of county residents who attend one or more free irrigation workshops annually. So I put that time constraint on it. We're doing this each year. And then as measured by a pre and post test for knowledge gain. So, it's kind of a mouthful, but it's got all of those smart elements there in one statement. And this is really what you want to go for with those objectives. We'll look at some objectives next, but paired with their respective goals, kind of as you would encounter them in a report format. And I like to, keep things connected as I'm going, just kind of makes me stay on track. But we'll have, as you get a copy of these slides later, the SMART format and what those mean is on pretty much all of these slides, so you can refer back to it from those notes as you review this material later. Okay, so goal and objective example 1. Okay, so here we have an invasive species program goal. Uh, Going back to that increased public awareness and community involvement. Um, I have kind of narrowed it down a little bit here in that goal, but I haven't gotten too prescriptive yet. I'm going to start to do that in my objectives. And here I'm moving from my most basic and lowest level objectives up to my highest one. This may or may not be the case for you. In this case, my objectives are actually building on each other to really hone in on that goal. So for objective one, public education, I'm timing the end of the first year, having at least 6 community workshops or public presentations. I have a number of people I am targeting to give those to, and a region that they will be from. I have an age range set in there too, so my audience is pretty defined. It's pretty loose, but it's defined. Um, and the impacts of invasive species, methods of identification, and best practices for management. So, what I'm going to be telling them and how I'm going to measure that participant and pre and post tests. And I kind of like to, once I've drafted something like this, as we'll see on the next slide, go back and put in all the initials. So that I make sure all of those elements of SMART are there in some way, shape, or form. I may rewrite it a little bit if I don't like the way that's expressing, but I'm at least, oh yes, wait, I'm missing this one. I know I can put it in. So that just kind of helps my process a little bit. Let's look at example 2. We're going to be working on the same goal, but look at objectives 2 and 3. So again, building on objective 1. So I've started to teach people. Um, Here I want to widen, kind of the range of the people that I'm teaching. So to start that, I want to help with a volunteer recruitment and training program. Start to train some folks that can be local volunteers, and get the training program going that gives them the knowledge that they need. And that's a whole program in itself, just recruiting those people, doing that outreach to reach them and taking the time to train them, is going to be, quite a bit. It's enough for one objective. So I've separated out into a separate objective. After we're done training them, we want to retain them and have them help with our programs. Keep them coming back, keep them active. So I've got another timeline on this. And I've got some information on how I'm going to do that. We're going to have volunteer opportunities for them, some more education opportunities that they can take advantage of, and an appreciation event. Let them know what they're doing is worth it, and we really respect that in the community. And with that, we're hoping to retain some percentage of those volunteers to assist with an annual community invasive removal event. So here we've told the public this is important. We've found a few key people that want to know more and help, and we're going to try to keep them on to help with wider community events so that we can have more impact in the community. And then if we look at the next slide, again, I've just gone through and put in those acronym initials there. You may find some of these, they're kind of blending together. They might be coming in the same statements. Um, just make sure all of those elements are there. They're strongly stated and they're something that you can measure and keep track of. So I know I said we talk about strong versus weak verbs. This is one I really highly encourage folks to do a web search for. There are a lot of really, really wonderful lists out there for reporting, for writing, that will just give you lists of strong and weak verbs to use. You want your objectives to really have some punch to them. So like we said earlier, getting someone to understand is one thing. Getting them to act on that, to demonstrate it, that they gain that knowledge is really what you'd like to go for, and those strong verbs will help lead you there. Okay, so what's missing? And if you guys want to unmute yourselves, or I won't be able to see the chat, so that might be best. But this was just kind of a little exercise. If we look at some objectives that aren't quite all the way there, um, looking at, what might be missing from those. So chime in if you spot something that seems to be missing. On the first one, we have program will increase farmer knowledge of and participation in educational and behavioral activities recognized as leading to decreased irrigation withdrawals. And that is a lengthy sentence, and it does seem to say a lot. Um, but I could notice some things that are missing right off the bat. All right, so I would say, here we have something. Oh, we have something in the chat. Let me see if I can get to it. Yes, increase by what? Great question, Ann. Yeah, so there's nothing measurable here. How much are you going to increase it? How are you going to measure what you've increased? Great observation. Yeah, so there's no details on how that's going to be done or measured. Time frame, great, Patrick. That is exactly right. When are you going to do this? Is this just an ongoing, endless effort? Not a strong objective. So yes, really good, you guys. These are the kind of things you'd want to add to that to make it strong. I say too, it might be a little vague at this point. What are those educational and behavioral activities that are recognized as leading to? You might want to spell that out a little bit more here too, but you guys did great seeing what was missing there. All right, next one. This effort will bring effective educational programs to Florida's residents, leading to improved irrigation practices and eventually to an increased water supply. Okay, so we do say this one does have a target audience this time. It's a little bit broader than the last one, farmer. Even farmer might be a little bit vague for some conditions. Um, but here, again, we have a vague audience. And being cognizant of our district boundaries, we're probably not putting on a program for the entire state. So it's something beyond what's missing there. This one, I think, lacks the same, it's not measurable, doesn't have the time frame there. It's also using some kind of lofty terms, increasing the water supply. You may be able to conserve water, but then, the leap to showing that that has added to the supply, it may or may not, depending on the circumstances. So just with your programs, avoid kind of getting too high into the goals that you might achieve. Be more specific and achievable. All right, next one, and type or speak up if you see what's up with this one. To provide information concerning sustainable irrigation practices that will be cost effective and reduce irrigation water use. Yes, great question. And what type of info? We're not being very specific here. Um, so yeah, we want to be more specific, you know, to provide information on low volume home irrigation systems, too. And we have no sense of audience in this one. So irrigation practices for who? Ties right into that. What type of info are we providing? We'd provide very different programs for residential homeowners than we would for a row crop producer, for example. So these are all the kind of details that you want to make sure are in there. Um, I think too, again, we don't have anything measurable in this one. And we really kind of have a low level goal or low level objective here. So, it's kind of the equivalent, like I mentioned earlier, passing out flyers at the fair. We're providing information, but who's to say that didn't get tossed in the trash 5 minutes after we put it in their hand or that it was even read? So again, think of how you can strengthen those up. The last one was kind of the good one. I think about everything's in here, but take a look and tell me how this looks to you guys. And to read it out loud, to conduct annual on-site small farm learning tours, focusing on water saving irrigation and programs with 50% of attendees planning to implement and 20% implementing one or more practices within 1 year as measured by a follow-up interview. I definitely see some ways that I might tweak that a little depending on the program, but I think this one does have all of those smart elements that we are looking for there. So again, it just can be kind of a helpful exercise. Awesome. Good job, Patrick. Yeah, I think so too. It seems to have everything in there. It tells me how I'm going to measure this, who it's going to, what it's going to be, how it's going to be delivered. So, as you're writing these, it can help to, exchange them with your board, your coworkers, your volunteers, get that kind of feedback and, tell them what I'm looking for. And do you see this all here? I kind of like having those go together. Um, I also, some of you guys know each other, some of you don't. But I think as within the districts, we do have some opportunity for cooperation, and that can include sharing these kind of ideas and making sure all of us are doing a better job. All right, so next we're going to look at the reporting outline, and we'll go through, kind of how we put our goals, objectives, and everything else into a report so that anyone who picks it up, whether that be our legislators, our county government, anyone who might be interested in what we're doing, can look through this report and get a sense of the work that we've put into it. Is it? I see. Okay. So, one thing I like to recommend with reporting is that before you even get into the goals and objectives, which there's no issue with just starting there and going right in. Here's our goals, here's our objectives for each program that we have. That's our report. Um, but it can really help to kind of set the tone for things as you go. So I like to include, description of the district. What are your basic facts, your relevant history, agricultural operations that are already in play, some that might be on the horizon, geography, population, kind of that flavor of the district that sets the tone for the situations and programs that will come. It's a good idea to have a section on the supervisors, and that really should say supervisors, staff, and most important volunteers if you have them. Give, their names, backgrounds, what's their relevant experience or education that really played into them fulfilling their role here. And if you have an advisory board. If you don't, it's a great idea to get one, a cadre of people who are out in the community dealing with these problems who can advise you and make sure that these things are staying current for your reporting and your mission. But if you don't, just stick with your folks that are working within the county there, and just put a you don't have to put a face on it or a picture, but make them a little bit more human to the people who might be reading your reports. Okay, next I like to kind of do a synopsis, contracts and grants and funds. Um, it really kind of paints a picture of the financial state of the district. It gives your reader a sense of how big your operations are or how small. I mean, I'm in a county of under 28,000 people. Our operations are not large. Our grants and contracts are not really a thing to report on, but we do have the opportunity to report on other things that we should be including, like in-kind contributions. So, that farmer that donated food for that program or the space that was donated for it. All of these things have a value that are something that is being given to your district, and it's good to recognize. And the same with the value of volunteer time. So if you can, this is another one for a web search because it does change every year, but there is a dollar level given to the value of volunteer time for every state in the United States. So you can look up Florida's for 2025 and say, okay, I had volunteers put in 100 hours at 22 and whatever cents it's at, I forget. That is a value that is really like a gift to the district and to the county that you're serving. So it's a really great thing to recognize. And that really includes the value of your supervisor's time that are volunteering. They're going to meetings, they're going to events, they're putting in time planning things, and they're doing this without a paycheck. So anybody who's in that condition, really try to capture that and communicate to your audience that these also are part of the financial picture for our district. Um, Governance and service, if you can report on this, if your supervisors or folks are in leadership roles in other committees, national committees, support networks, things like that. District advisory committee, if you have one, you can put this here or in the other section. Um, but it's just a really good idea to kind of, paint that bigger picture of what you're doing in and out of the district there. All right, next reporting thing before you get to the goals and objectives in your programs. I like to just have a little synopsis of the programs. It's just, kind of putting the name. So I'm just stating the title. Um, but I also like to look at each of those programs as a percent of what the district is investing in. Um, so one program, maybe half of the resources, whether that is the time, the money, the capital, anything that's kind of going into that, whatever is your estimation of that. Um, so one program may be more weighted than the other. All should be kind of supporting each other, but it just really paints a picture of how much effort is being put into each of those programs. It helps people instantly understand, okay, I can see the priority. Program two, but program one is almost up there. Program three is giving a little bit of support to those. So just to get another part that, helps clarify what the district's doing. Okay, and then we finally get into the program itself. Um, and the information that you want to provide there. So the background and goal, start with that situation statement that we talked about. And it's a good place to have, if you have maps, graphs, tables, anything like that showing, you might want to show the increase in nitrate pollution over the last 5 years to demonstrate what you're setting out to do with the program in that situation statement. Information like that that's helping build what the expectation is. Okay, then state your program goal, very clearly so that it could be, even if it's not separated out, could be picked out as a sentence or two for somebody to interpret. Okay, then list those program objectives, and you can have a few bullet points under these if you want to, but just avoid getting in the weeds of too much detail there. Objective is just going to be stated just as it was in those development examples that we looked at with all of those SMART elements in there for each program objective you have. Okay, so if we look further at what we could include for our programs, we have our goals, we have our objectives. Those will have those performance measures built in. So that first round of requirements we all got last year that we had to already turn in, those parts are all there. But to expand on that, it's a good idea to, let them know what you did. Um, I think I got a little out of sync here. Bear with me just a moment. Okay. Um, so for program one, talk about, what were the educational methods you used for each of those objectives? um, what were creative works? And so this is, kind of synopsizing for objective one. We developed 5 PowerPoints. For objective two, we developed 4 handouts and a field day outline and teaching format. So this is going to just kind of recap what you've done. Creative works and publications, I think it's a good idea to list these. You will wind up with way more than you think at the end of the year. And so if you're able to say, we did 10 PowerPoints and we did 5 posters and we wrote newspaper articles, 6 of them, and we had 2 field day events where we produced 6 fact sheets. It just kind of enumerates all of the work that went into that particular program, and you'll have that for each of your programs. I also like to include a summary of the clientele that were reached for that program. So that just might be a little chart of, event one, 20 participants, event two, 45 participants, event three, 16 participants, total program participants for program one, given number. Um, you can also break that down if you want to by bullet points. Number of contacts that you had from field consultations, for example, versus office consultations, people who walked in and talked to you, people who called you on the phone, people who came to a group learning event, people who visited your website. That's a metric folks often forget to point out. But you can go in and see how many website hits your program page got, your event pages for those programs, and you can add up all of those website visits as another metric of what you've done for that program. Okay, and then once we've listed all of those, so we kind of got into the what we set out to do, and then what we created to help us do that, we want to get into our outcomes and impacts. So our impacts are, what happened with those performance measures. These are part of the annual report we'll have to turn in December. Um, and for these, briefly restate that objective. Just don't delve into a lot of detail, just restate it, and then state the outcome. Did you meet the objective? The program successfully taught 50 people meeting the objective we set out for. Um, the program did not meet the objective of teaching 50 people. Stay factual here. You can use, graphs and tables again if that makes sense for the situation. But you may want to state a little bit about why an outcome was not met. COVID, though, we had a lot of programs canceled over COVID. And those were understandably, there was something that very much impacted that attendance we expected to have. Um, but if you don't have a direct reason that you can point to for why a particular impact happened, you may want to just, state that we will be investigating, so we can change course to address that. Um, so in the impacts, include, things like the number of sites you monitored or the pounds of fertilizer reduced. You can kind of, just synopsize that. Um, it's things that we talked about before, putting in kind of a chart format, but now we can get a little bit more into the details, right? Some paragraphs. And then the last thing I like to include, besides the impacts, this is after we told you what the problem was and what program we were developing to combat that problem and our objectives of how exactly we're going to make that happen for a certain audience within a certain time frame. These success stories kind of bring it back to the human level. So if you have a chance to collect these, and these may be, anecdotes shared at meetings or overheard at programs, but it's just highlighting a particular connection or an event. Little Billy was just so enthralled with all of the information on better feeds for livestock that he's rewriting a whole plan for his 4-H project. Something that puts a human touch on it. And it tells a little bit about the measure of success that you're getting in that program. So things to look for there could be, we increased stewardship. A group of 5 people who came to the program formed a club and go out and remove invasives in a park that they adopted. Um, Satisfaction with learning. 5 participants were so impressed with the program that we offered that they have asked for a more advanced form of training. Or, if you solved a particular problem, that is a great one. Farmer Mike was having a heck of a time with his irrigation, and our fertigation program solved that and some other nutrient deficiency problems he was having. Uh, so that's just, again, the success stories just kind of bring it full circle and allow you to really show a human way that the program has achieved success. And they also make great elevator pitches if you need them. Okay. And then as far as the program itself goes, I'm sorry, the reporting itself goes. So we've gone through this process for one program now. And you would go through and go back through this process for every program that you have to kind of finalize your report. I do like to end after repeating this outline for each of the programs to include kind of a summary, just kind of sum up the state, tell them you told them messaging. It can be very much like your intro statement, but just kind of restating that in a way that really closes with the message that you really thought was important. Um, References can also be great if you have some, to just provide a reference list, like a bibliography back when you were writing reports. But that allows people to, go and check your data sources, your other resources for themselves. And that is kind of all I have on the reporting side of it. I did promise some resources. So here are some of the reports that I've looked at, especially on the SMART objectives. Like I said, looking at some of these along with what's been presented tonight will just kind of give you more depth on writing those SMART objectives yourself. And I do suggest that, everyone take a little stab at it, whether it's for a new program, an existing program, you can either write something quickly or pull up something you already have and go back and plug in those smart elements. Um, you'll see one of them even has two M's in it because they had the measurable and the meaningful both in there. So, pick a system that makes sense for you, and check to see that that's going to keep you on track. And that is all I have for the presentation tonight. We do have some time left. I was not sure how long it would take or how much discussion we would have. So I did plan a little bit of extra time at the end of this one. If we have questions, now would be a great time to unmute yourself or do some more typing. Um, and we'll get those answered before the end of the session. And like I said, I will be taking the PowerPoint, making a PDF out of it that includes the notes. I have additional information and recaps of what was said versus what was on the slide on that. We'll make it available on the website where the training links are. But if you prefer to have a copy emailed to me, just reply to one of my emails and let me know. We can get it to you that way. And thank you all for coming out tonight and for all the work that you're doing in your districts. I really appreciate you wanting to kind of look at this reporting process and the process of making good goals, objectives, and having those performance measures in there. Because I think, it may seem onerous, but it really is an opportunity for our districts to get better at what they're doing just by examining our process and making sure we're on track. So thank you. And any questions, please feel free. Thanks, Peggy. Okay, so it doesn't seem like we have any questions, so I can let everyone get on with their evening a little bit early. But if anything occurs to you after the fact, please don't hesitate to reach out, whatever way is easiest for you, and we can clarify anything. If you have anyone you work with or talk to in other districts that is sorry they missed this, let me know that too, and we'll see about scheduling another version of this. But thanks everyone for coming tonight. I appreciate it. And I'll go ahead and end the meeting, and I'll look forward to seeing everyone out in their districts and seeing what you're doing. Thank you.